Thank you, Dr. Leclerc, for your great hospitality. It's great to be here again. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for sparing your time. We have a challenge ahead of us to rally ourselves for the clean revolution, and we've got a fantastic group of speakers to hopefully inspire and inform us to start the week off. One little housekeeping point. We'll be accepting large donations from anybody whose phone goes off during proceedings. So if you want to make a donation, please leave your phone on so that it can ring. Firstly, a few words of thanks. We're delighted to have, as our founding sponsor, Swiss Re. Swiss Re's been, I think, probably the earliest, or one of the earliest of all of the businesses in the world to show leadership on climate change, has sustained over more than a decade now of leadership on the issue, and to have them as our founding sponsor for Climate Week NYC is great. No better company for us to work with. I'd also like to thank some of our other partners and sponsors, HSBC, the Dutch Postcode Lottery, the Global CSI Institute, Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. The acronym doesn't roll off the tongue, does it, Dale? The NASDAQ, Timberland, Bloomberg, and Edelman. And also our other partners, the United Nations, the UN Foundation, the City of New York, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Tick 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 campaign, New York Academy of Science, COP16, and of course, New York Public Library. If we think about songs now, in Copenhagen, we were partially pleased by progress, but left somewhat disappointed. We saw a triumph, perhaps, of competition over collaboration. But focusing on the competition, we now have many countries, many states, many regions, many cities, and many businesses competing for a share of the low-carbon economy. If we think of the scale of change that we're going through at this point in time, this is the century when we will build the world's cities. Every other century was kind of like practice. In 1950, there were 750 million people living in cities. Today, it's 3.5 billion. By mid-century, it'll be 6.3 billion. China alone will build all the buildings that are in the US in the next 20 years. 5.1 billion square feet of buildings. So an unprecedented rate of urbanization going on around the planet. Also in terms of economic growth, and we forget that when we're currently in a recession in some countries, but overall the sustained story of economic growth will continue. And if we think about it over the next 25 years or so, in terms of purchasing power parity, it doesn't matter whether it takes 30 or 20, go with me on this, actually we will triple the global economy in terms of purchasing power parity. So all of human history, we have one economy. The next 25 years, we put 2 more economies alongside that, and we have to provide for the people. At the same time, we need to reduce carbon emissions into the atmosphere by more than half by mid-century. Unprecedented growth, reduce carbon emissions by more than half. That means that all growth must be close to zero carbon growth. But that's now possible. What sounded like a tall order a few years ago now looks possible, but we need our very best efforts to do it. It's about financing this transformation. If we look at some of the most optimistic figures on this, last year in Europe, 62% of new energy, of new power generation, came from renewable energy. Alternative energy is now mainstream energy, 62% in Europe. Globally, it was 47%, so almost half of all new power generation came from renewables. That is a very promising sign. But really, we know that we need to increase the pace on this issue. HSBC did a report recently, and they suggested that the low-carbon economy will triple to $2.2 trillion by mid-century. Not by mid-century, sorry, by 2020. So 10 years, a tripling in 10 years. That's fantastic growth. There's money to be made. You know, as we've said before in the report, carbon down, profits up. This is where we will go. So the focus of this week is to come together and look at what can we do to actually bring governments and business together to form new types of public-private partnerships to focus on this issue and to use both policy and the best minds of business to actually finance this clean revolution. I've taken enough time. I'm going to hand over to our illustrious panel. As our first speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce Christiana Figueres. In May, Christiana was appointed by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as the Executive Secretary to the UNFCCC. It's a big job. It's a huge job. You'll have all of our support, Christiana. Over to you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a big job for a little person. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much for this opportunity to address you today. Maybe more so than in previous years, this initiative is highly pertinent. 2010 has seen no shortage of weather-related disasters. Of course, the recent floods in Pakistan, China, and Chad, the wildfires in Russia, the heavy snowfalls of early 2010, and the recent unusual tornado in Brooklyn cannot be categorized as direct climate change impacts with any scientific certainty. But they do give us a taste of the challenge the world faces and will increasingly face going forward. They're like a ringing alarm with one single message. It's time to take real mitigation and adaptation action to prevent much worse in the future. In some corners, concerted global action on climate change is about giving up sovereignty, bearing costs, and sacrificing growth. This could not be further from the truth. In fact, the opposite is true, as I think everyone here instinctively knows. Global action on climate change is not about restricting choices, but about supporting cooperation that will open up a whole new world of economic, social, and environmental opportunity. Dealing effectively with climate change will be in the long-term benefit of all countries and peoples, even if there are short-term costs to be borne. This is not only because we will avoid the damages that climate could bring, but also because the measures to reduce emissions can deliver a much-needed stimulus to the global economy. It's becoming increasingly visible. Action, especially mitigation action in the energy sector, is being taken at the local level with business involvement. Examples in this country include recent renewable energy initiatives in Pennsylvania, Colorado, New Mexico, and many more. While different in nature, what they all have in common is that they will reduce emissions, retain and create jobs, improve energy security, and save communities money. This trend is also being observed globally. Around the world, investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency have increased dramatically since 2007, despite the financial crisis. Companies are seeking to reduce their carbon footprint, consumers are demanding more environmentally sound goods, and investors increasingly want to tie their investments to the winning industries of tomorrow. Additionally, investments in clean energy generation offer safe returns and have to a large degree outperformed other investment options. This trend is so marked that leading international financial institutions have described it as the new mega trend. That's encouraging, but the challenge is huge, and so my hope is that this trend will continue to grow and establish itself as a global norm. Because without such a global norm, the world will not be able to respond to climate change in a meaningful way. According to the International Energy Agency, global investments to meet energy demand up to 2030 amount to 26 trillion. More than half of that is needed in developing countries, where 1.5 billion people still have little or no access to electricity. These investments increasingly need to be directed into low emissions technologies, primarily in emerging countries. For many developing countries, such low emission investments could assist them to leapfrog emission-intensive energy generation. The leapfrog should not be radically different from the evolution of the cell phone. The first cell phone was developed by Martin Cooper, a Motorola employee in 1973, and it weighed 2.5 pounds. By the end of this year, we will have 5 billion cell phones being used around the world, weighing under 4 ounces, and being used for a wealth of both voice and data transmission applications that were simply unthinkable 30 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, financing the low emissions revolution is at the heart of the international climate change process and a prerequisite for its success. Successful partnerships between public and private financial institutions will be crucial to delivering and directing the flows of investment that we need. So have the climate negotiations advanced? For all its shortcomings, the Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen last year did give the world a clear indication that international policy intends to step up mitigation and limit global temperature increases to 2 degrees. And time has not stood still since Copenhagen. Work has resumed towards the next climate change conference in Cancun, Mexico, at the end of this year. Additionally, governments are currently debating the role of private sector finance in the context of long-term funding. Both the desire to see action implemented, as well as the intention to limit global climate temperature increases to 2 degrees, point to the fact that action to abate climate change is poised to grow, even if step by step. Growth means change, and in this case, change means opportunity for those that embrace it. And here, I want to return to the comparison with the telephony revolution. What is most interesting about that revolution is not that it occurred, but that it occurred in the absence of national or international regulation. It occurred driven exclusively by the opportunity for profit. With growth in the global energy demand increasing by 50% by 2050, the same could be argued in a compelling fashion for the energy sector. So in a deliberately provocative way, I must ask industry, particularly industry in the energy sector, what are you waiting for? Thank you.